Hi, thank you everyone, and welcome to the question hour with your course coordinator. This is Arun Agrawal. I have responded to some of the discussion posts that have happened till now. And right now, what I want to do is go through some of the questions that you have posted. But before I do that, I really want to acknowledge the support and the role played by the University of Michigan in thinking carefully about what the mission of the university is in engaging the public on issues of overriding importance, both nationally and globally. So thank you, University of Michigan, for making this Teach Out possible. I also want to say that I'm very encouraged by the range of discussion posts that have come in over the last day or so. They point to the importance of an event like this and the kind of space it provides people such as you to talk about things that concern you and things that provoke you as you go through the materials for this Teach Out. And having said that, I want to turn to the questions that you have posted for me to talk about and to provide what insight I can in response to these questions. I went through all the questions, and very broadly speaking, I think there are four types of questions, or four kinds of questions that were posted. The first focused on the extent to which economic stagnation or low levels of incomes or the fact that a country is not doing well economically can threaten democracy. The second question looked at or asked about the extent to which authoritarian rule can peter out on its own, or when is it that authoritarian rule declines. The third question asked about, and this was obvious from a lot of discussion posts, what can we do? What can citizens living under authoritarian regimes do? So let me go through these questions one by one, starting with the very first one. And I want to take the example of the United States, and so there are two graphs that I want to show you. The first one shows that in the United States, the national income has increased quite in a very healthy way from 1962 to 2016. So roughly for the last 50 years, 55 years, the national income has increased for adults by about 61%. But if you look at the incomes of the bottom 1%, bottom 50% in the country, that is abysmal change. It's actually no change at all. The share of income for the bottom 50% has remained just about the same. So what you see in the United States is a rise in incomes for the country as a whole, but very little change for the poorer part of the US population. And let me then show you the second slide, which tells you an even more striking story. So between 1962 and 1980, the relative share of the top 1% of income earners in the US and the bottom 50% of the income earners was about the same. So the green line that you see on this graph tells you what the share of the bottom 50% of income earners is and has been for the last 50 years, and what the share of the top 1% of income earners has been is shown in the orange line. Starting in 1950, when Mr. Reagan was elected to office, you see a complete change in what was happening till then. The bottom 50% income earner share started going down, and the share of income for the top 1% started going up. And that has remained steady and true all the way from 1980 till today. So we have had Republican presidents in the country in that time. We have had Democratic presidents in the country in the time. There have been different policies that these different presidents have followed. But the overall shift that started in 1980 under Mr. Reagan has continued all the way through. A decline in the share of the bottom 50% and a rise in the share of the top 1%, with barely a break in these 50 years, in these last since 1980, from 1980 to 2016. That is, I think, the most important issue when we think about incomes and different kinds of economic policies and the relationship with authoritarian rule. And this is true not just of the United States. Globally, the incomes of the poorest have not changed much. They have remained the same, and the incomes of the rich have increased. I think governments really need to be concerned about this and to do much more to support the interests of those who are poor, rather than what they have been doing, which is following policies which allow the top 1% or the top rich people to become more rich. This is necessary, I believe, for more democratic rule, for more democratic possibilities in any country, not just in the United States. Let me turn to the second set of questions, which were about, is it the case that authoritarian rule can peter out on its own? Or another way in which this question was put was, can people who are authoritarian, can their authoritarian tendencies, or can bad authoritarian tendencies be checked by a good authoritarian? And I don't think there is too much historical evidence that when you have authoritarian rulers in power, they relinquish their power on their own. You have to have some challenges, ideally by citizens who are aware, and citizens in a democracy that are organized and who care about democracy, for authoritarian rule to decline, or for the tendency towards exercise of authoritarian forms of power to come down. I think it's not likely to be the case that authoritarian rulers would give up power on their own, or that you can check the power of a bad authoritarian ruler by a good authoritarian ruler coming into power. The third set of questions was about, is the U.S. moving towards authoritarian rule, and what can we do if we care about authoritarian rule and trying to check the exercise of authoritarian power? I think the U.S. is a very strong and vigorous democracy. Unlike what we see today happening in Russia or in Turkey or in Hungary or in Venezuela or a lot of other countries that we have talked about in this teach out, unlike these countries, the U.S. is a healthy democracy. It has been a healthy democracy for more than 200 years. And we shouldn't think that the U.S. has become or rapidly becoming an authoritarian country. That having been said, I think there are disturbing signs that point to what those who are concerned about authoritarian rule, what they should do or what they should think about doing. And in talking about this, I want to bring you back to one of the slides from one of the lectures, which talks about the fundamental institutions of democratic politics. So in the discussion posts that I saw, a number of you thought about and pointed to what you believe to be the fundamental institutions of democratic politics. And I think very often the two things that people pointed to, that you pointed to, were freedom of expression or freedom of press, and second, a strong and vigorous and independent judiciary. And I totally agree that these are absolutely vital for a democracy to function and for a democracy to safeguard the interests of its citizens. Free and fair elections, I would say in addition, and a vigorous opposition are also bedrock institutions of democratic politics. If you don't have free and fair elections, then a small minority of voters can elect the majority of legislators or the president in a country. If you don't have a vigorous opposition, you see the same party getting elected again and again and again into power, and that is not healthy for a democracy. So those two are also, I think, very, very important for democracies to function. In addition, as you have pointed out yourselves, it is important for press freedoms and for an independent judiciary to maintain institutions of a democracy and the rights of citizens, and to safeguard the rights of citizens in between election periods. So these institutions and the importance of these institutions for a democracy also give you some sense of what citizens in a democracy that is threatened by authoritarian tendencies or by authoritarian rule, what citizens in such a situation can do. And so I would say there are two kinds of things that one might point to. One set of things concerns some general ideas, so some general points to keep in mind. And the second set of things is about the more specific things, about the more specific actions that people living in a context characterized by authoritarian tendencies can do, both to resist what's going on in terms of authoritarian rule and in terms of trying to be effective as aware and thoughtful citizens in a democracy. So I'm going to consult some of my notes that I took as I was trying to think about the responses to your questions. And I think some of the general rules are, if you are living in a context where authoritarian rule is in play, or where you think there are authoritarian tendencies in play, some of the things that you should keep in mind generally are that you should believe what authoritarian rulers or autocrats say. You shouldn't think that what they are saying is really not possible, that it cannot possibly happen. What authoritarian rulers often say, they mean that. The second thing that you should keep in mind is that people don't change, tigers don't change their stripes in a day. So don't think, if there are some signs of normality, that the world has again become normal. There are things that may appear to be normal, but it's not really so. And one of the issues there is that when you are confronted with the same kinds of attacks on democracy taking place, very often those kinds of attacks can begin to seem normal. And you shouldn't think that things that were out of the ordinary they have become normal. A third thing you should keep in mind is that institutions are only as strong as the people who safeguard those institutions. So institutions are not going to protect you. It's the people, and it's the people who safeguard the institutions, who keep these democratic institutions vigorous. They are the ones who have the capacity or the ability to protect you. It took Putin a relatively short amount of time to undermine the press and to undermine the opposition and to take actions as a result of which the independent judiciary in Russia collapsed. It's somewhat similar developments are also visible in Turkey, where thousands of people in the opposition have been jailed. Hundreds of academics have been fired, and you can't really imagine, one could not have imagined that things would go downhill so fast. A fourth and fifth thing you should keep in mind is that it is important for citizens to be aware and for citizens to think about how to contest authoritarian tendencies if they believe they're living under authoritarian rule. And finally, think about the kind of future you want. Think about the kind of outcomes you would like to see. So these are some of the general things that people living under authoritarian rule, whether it is in Turkey or in Russia or in Poland or in Venezuela, should keep in mind, or people who believe that their political system is being assaulted or is undergoing a change should keep in mind as ways of trying to maintain the vigor of democratic politics. In terms of specific actions that people can take, those citizens living under authoritarian rule or who believe that their systems are under assault from authoritarian rulers can take, is to place their faith in these two bedrock institutions that we talked about, which is a free and independent press and the freedom of expression, and second, a free and independent judiciary. I think these two institutions are really important to support for people in democracies and for people who are living under authoritarian rule, to the extent that it is possible and safe to do so. Another set of things that people can do is to be more engaged in politics. And when I say that, I mean peaceful politics, in trying to think about what are the best ways in which you can bring pressure to bear upon your representatives as the constituents to which those representatives are accountable. So I have seen many of these things happening in other countries and indeed in the United States, people participating in town halls, people calling their representatives, people asking their representatives to safeguard their interests, people trying to form discussion groups with their fellow citizens and talking about things that concern them, trying to come up with ways of supporting the pillars of democratic politics. I think these are very concrete steps that citizens living in democracies and in systems threatened by authoritarian tendencies, these are very concrete things that you can do. The one general thing that I would add to the list that I said earlier is that you should not feel as if there is no hope or as if you are in despair. I think if you reach out, if you connect, if you talk to others, you will find many people who are like-minded, who care about similar issues, who want democracy to function effectively and vigorously, who are interested in participating in democratic politics beyond just voting. And it is in conversation with and dialogue with such aware and thoughtful and alive and citizens who are alive to the possibilities of democracy that you would find a way to come out of despair and to find a way to realize your hopes for a systematic defense of democracy and for keeping democratic politics alive well into your future and into your children's future. So thank you very much for all these different questions you asked and for giving me a chance to come back and be a part of this Teach Out with you. Share information about the Teach Out with anybody you think would be interested in this. There's a way in which the Teach Out provides a forum for people to engage in respectful and aware discussion with each other, and I encourage you to be a part of this, and I also encourage you to encourage others to be a part of this. Thank you very much.